Hey people, welcome back to the channel. This is a story in which Madara is Naruto's grandfather. He implanted his and Hashirama's cells into Naruto and trained him, which made him extremely strong. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the video, leave a comment if you want to suggest fanfic. Check the description for credits and support the creator of the story. So let us begin. Chapter 45. A few days later, 500 innocent civilian lives is a great casualty, Emperor. Really, I am surprised that you haven't turned your attention towards Iwagakure for their actions. You cannot excuse the kind of unnecessary deaths they caused. Gaara stated strongly, facing the emperor. Beside him were Kotaro, Konan, Mei and Hisuke. Nagato was still missing, since there seemed to be other important matters that needed to be dealt with in the village hidden in Rain. Not to mention he controlled the entire Rain country. Though technically the Rain belonged to the Imperial Kingdom, Nagato's village was a megakure, but the emperor had been the one to make arrangements to control the Rain, and put Nagato in charge of it. They were all here because the news of Iwa's daring assault on the Empire's people was an assault that couldn't be forgiven. If Onoki was willing to go this far, then there had to be some action taken against the cage for the unprovoked murder of the innocents. The Sand Cage was disgusted by the blatant disregard for civilian lives and the provoking of war. What would possess a man to blow up 5 trains carrying innocent people? He'd killed many people in his past, but he was a crazed person who believed the only way to sustain and prove his existence was through killing others. Onoki wasn't a mad person. He was a cage who had the trust of other people. Would he be happy if someone else murdered the civilians of his village for no good reason? Even he would be angry, especially with the number of people that were killed. That number was almost the total of Naruto's special force, and also the Imperial forces, with 4 commanders, and the commander-in-chief being Naruto. Targeting civilians to send a message is cowardly, and something that should never be allowed to slip through without proper measures, Mei added, standing with the others. Just because she was the wife of the emperor didn't mean that she could stand in beside Naruto. Hell no. When they were in this palace, there was only one leader, and that was Naruto. He didn't share his kingship with anyone. Heika, Kotaro stated, he was one of the generals in the special army Naruto had trained, while the empire was still being built. Aside from him and Hisuke, there were 2 others who commanded the army within the village. Military action to prove our might is needed to show the other nations that we don't hide behind you, but we can also fight. The true strength of the Imperial Army has never been tested by any serious opponent or enemy. Yes, they were efficient in making sure that the village was secure from enemies, but they were never called upon into a battleground to fight a serious army. Shinobi from the capital were stronger, and fought well in their missions. It was mostly because anyone less than Jonin wasn't recognized as a shinobi in the laws of the country. There were no genins who did missions outside the village, nor chunin. As the emperor put it, the children should be at the academy learning or playing at home rather than being in the battleground. This was referred to, genins. Of course this led to the rank of genin being scrapped. No, it never existed in the empire. I agree with Kotaro, Hisuke said rather firmly. Those people were supposed to be safe in our trains. True, we cannot always protect them outside the country, but the trains are ours and we must take responsibility for it. The emperor pose wasn't forgotten as Naruto deliberated everything that was said. It wasn't that he hadn't thought of a decision and already knew what he was going to do. These people already knew that a decision has already been made, yet they still came here with their suggestions. Perhaps they just wanted to show him that they were prepared to take extreme actions against anyone who dares disrupt the peace of the empire. There has been a change in the wind currents. Do you feel where the wind is blowing? None actually answered the question posed by the emperor. It is necessary to show our might to these fools, but I do wonder what Hagoromo would do in this kind of situation. Onoki has done wrong, and has to be punished, severely. He was warned after all. Heika. Kotaro, what is the situation the City of Sound? Naruto asked, looking at the man who controlled part of the military within the country. More like the Jonin commander. We have brought calm, and everything is stable. I have stationed some of my strongest men in the city for now. The people merely await His Majesty's presence to assure them of their safety, the man reported. The people awaited him. Did these people say they want the emperor to come down to assure them of their safety, or are you saying you think it is best His Majesty descends into the city of sound to show he is a king who cares for his people? Kotaro didn't stutter, nor did he hesitate in his response. Both, he said firmly. I believe it would be both good for you to visit the city and also honor their wishes. It would calm things and make them return to the way they were. What more calm is needed? Didn't you just say you brought calm and things were stable in the city? The emperor asked curiously. Conan saved Kotaro the trouble of answering the question. Even in the capital, there is some unrest. The people aren't particularly happy about the deaths of their countrymen. Some are even demanding that the emperor do something about the issue. Naturally, no one will dare come into this palace, but I've had a few guests at the Crystal Palace. However, it will only be a matter of time before they do something stupid. If the emperor is so high and mighty, why doesn't he just go and put the Tsuchikage in his place? Maybe he doesn't care about it. We know that our emperor isn't an evil man, but his emotional record is not the most reliable. Gaara cleared his throat. These are just some whispers the Mizukage and I overheard while walking through the streets of the city. Ho! So the ignorant fools have now learned to speak ill of the emperor. Naruto turned his glance towards Mei, but didn't speak to her. Instead, his response was to Conan. I was not aware that there was a suggestion box that was placed in the Crystal Palace made for people to throw in the thoughts on how the emperor was to act. There is none. Tell the man who deals with them to remind these people that I was not voted to be king and I will act when I feel like it. This democracy they think they are living has given them something to lean on. I see. I have been keeping quiet for too long, and now they think that they have a say. Has my quietness brought the illusion that I have weakened? Likely, Hashirama responded. A lot of people haven't seen your power firsthand. The first people to have dwelled in this place are the ones who have seen His Majesty's power. The others have only heard rumors, and now they are starting to doubt those rumors. I see. Naruto became quiet for a moment. Conan, you will get a report from Shinji about some insolent fools who are having thoughts of rebellion. I want them removed from the capital by the time I get back. There are such people. Gaara sounded surprised that even in this place someone could think of rebelling, especially when Naruto didn't actually oppress anyone. Well, if they continued to demand things from him, he was going to grow tired of them and oppress them in a way that no one would be able to save them. Yes, Naruto said. Uchiha Naruto has completed all preparations. I'm now able to freely walk out of here as I please. Since you people are insisting, we shall head to Iwagakure and fetch Onoki. Hashirama, have Shinji rush his report, and get now. We will depart for Iwa. We're going to fight. Naruto shook his head, not in Iwagakure. I will handle things with Onoki. The people won't be satisfied if the emperor just watches. Besides, I did assure Onoki that I would deal with any attack to my country. He seemed to smile for a moment before adding. Your battle will be somewhere else. There is another rebellion from our neighbors and it is time we dealt with it. What exactly are you going to do to Iwagakure? Although Gaara wanted Onoki to be punished, he didn't want massive destruction to the land. It wouldn't change anything if they also responded by killing innocent people. Personally, he would rather have Onoki brought to them to be a fair judgment over his crimes. The likely sentence in a maximum security prison. I'm just going to remove Onoki as Tsuchikage and replace him with Kuretsuchi. With her in charge, we will no longer have Iwagakure as our enemy, or at least most of it. Naruto stated standing up. Mei, the palace is yours to explore. Conan, request the Cage to help you in rooting out insects that think they can become elephants. The rest of you meet me at the City of Sound in an hour. He was gone in a swirl of black flames. Do you know what he was preparing? He said. Uchiha Naruto has finished his preparations. Gaara asked looking at Conan. But the older woman shook her head. She didn't know, nobody knew. Do any of you think that this is the ideal situation he wanted? I could have done without the murders, but if he does kill Onoki, who will complain? Conan questioned, looking at Kotaro and Hashirama. It isn't the time to second-guess His Majesty, Shinji stated, announcing his presence. He appeared along with Now. The Emperor forgot to mention some important details about the changes that he has implemented for the kingdom. It was obvious that there was no forgetting from the side of the Emperor. General Shinji will take over as commander of all the forces of the country from Nagato. Haisuke will keep his post as head of the Special Corps, and I keep my post as head of the Imperial Court. However, I will be joined by both the Mizukage and Kazekage. Until Gurren gives birth, Konan will remain Prime Minister. However, she will remain as chair of the Council during that time. Once Gurren returns, His Majesty will take charge of things. Now stated. The preparations His Majesty was making will be revealed soon. What I can tell you is that the real purge begins now, Shinji said, handing Konan the file he'd been working on. Black, he called. The messenger of the Emperor appeared in a flash. Send the message to the men, and return to me once you're done. Hi, the messenger disappeared. Mei folded her hands across her chest, staring at Shinji. You're acting like the boss, he was giving instructions like he owned everything. She was the wife of the Emperor and that should make her his second in command. Well, when we speak of anything that has to do with military, I am the boss. The only who can give us, now, Haisuke, and Kotaro, orders is His Majesty. You're the wife of the Emperor, but that is all you are until you hand over the mantle of Mizukage to someone else. As it stands, Konan-sama is the one in command. She chairs the council and is the prime minister of the country. Basically, she is the Emperor's right hand, Shinji responded calmly. Mei frowned. She was still not given any power in the country, aside being a member of the judicial system. You didn't have to put it in that way, Shinji now said. Formally, when the Emperor is away you're supposed to be the Empress and lead the country. However, since you're still the Mizukage, it disqualifies you. The judicial system can ratify this law to suit your desires. Of course, the Emperor wouldn't approve, but it was enough to make the woman smile. Getting back to the matter at hand, Gaara stared at Shinji and asked. What exactly is the real purge? I thought ridding the world of bandit camps was the Empire's service to the shinobi world. He doesn't know everything about it, Kotaro said. In each one of us, the Emperor gives a certain piece of information and keeps the rest to himself. However, there are 3 other people who know more. Samui, the messenger and Gurren. Nonetheless, the Emperor is the one with all the information. We will have a proper meeting once we return with His Majesty. He will explain some things, and I'm sure Gurren will be present, Shinji stated. For now, we have a task to perform. Prime Minister, you know which forces you have the authority to command. Though, if we're going to do by the law, I suggest you take Nao's counsel before doing anything. But that is up to you. With Nao's absence, you still have the authority to do what you must. Iwa, the time of reckoning has finally arrived, Naruto said, standing just a distance away from Iwa's large gates. He could be clearly seen by the guards at the gate. This was the time for Iwa to be punished for its crimes against the Empire. This was the time for the righteous hand of God to slap the village for the unforgivable sins it has committed against his empire. Standing slightly behind the Emperor were his 4 generals, 2 on the left and 2 on the right, with the Emperor between. They'd just appeared at the location a minute ago and the Emperor was probably waiting for the village to notice his presence before taking action. It couldn't be said that he had come to speak. Anyone thinking along those lines needed to take his medication to help stabilize the thinking process. Heika, how are you going to proceed with this? Haisuke asked. The Emperor hadn't discussed the strategy for dealing with the situation. He had said that he would deal with it himself. I would suggest we plan something beforehand. There could be some nasty surprises waiting for us when we enter the village, Shinji added, trying to think of what they would do about the situation. At the Emperor's silence, Haisuke sighed, grumbling slightly. Heika, are you thinking of just storming into the village and overpowering them? Though it was put as a question, it wasn't a question for Haisuke as he already knew the answer. Overpowering them will prove to be the most suitable option for this task. This is an entire village we're talking about. You just need to release all your power to wipe them out. They are never going to give you the time to think of a tactic because of their numbers, Now said. They are coming, the last member of the group said, sensing hundreds of shinobi rushing toward their location. After I have literally crashed into the village, at a given point you 4 will erect a barrier suitable for holding things in and out. Naruto said, not bothering to respond to their thoughts. Step back a little, I wish to announce my presence the proper way, he then snapped his fingers. A clone carrying the truth-seeking balls appeared through a portal. The balls were an annoyance as they were always on standby. They had no off switch and it really bothered him as he couldn't go around carrying them at all times. To deal with the problem, he always had a clone carry them, and had the clone sent to his core dimension. When needed, he just had to summon the clone. The clone puffed away, leaving the truth-seeking balls to enter their usual formation behind the Emperor. Naruto held his right hand palm open in front of him. 5 of the truth-seeking balls formed a circle just in front of his palm. There was a build-up of chakra as the balls began to spin. The rotation became so fast that there was nothing but a blur in front of the Emperor. Your Majesty, what are you planning to do? Naruto didn't respond. Instead, he said something else. This distance won't do, before flashing straight at the gates. This will do, he said. It was loud enough for the guards to hear him. Bastard. You've got some. The guard never got to finish as the Emperor released his jutsu. Judgment of the omnipresent sage, a blast of white energy shot from the front of Naruto, in a blinding flash of light and speed. It happened so fast, no explosion whatsoever, but the results were clearly visible for all to see. The blast had cut through the village, from front to back, dividing it in half. Everything that stood in the way of the jutsu had been turned to ashes. If one looked from above, one could see a clear stream that spread about 40 meters wide. Naturally, panic invaded the villagers and all hell broke loose. Naruto didn't wait for an invitation, he flashed into the air before shooting down to the center of the village. The Emperor did what he said he would, he literally crashed down upon the village, straight into the road his jutsu had created. Nothing works better than starting things with bang, Naruto said as his 4 generals flashed beside him, all visibly stunned by the jutsu His Majesty had just released. That was something like a Bijumuda which blasted straight through the village, creating a path, the very path he stood on, Shinji said mildly. I must say it is impressive though. What kind of jutsu was it, Your Majesty? The truth-seeking balls are known to negate all forms of ninjutsu, they failed in senjutsu though. When this thing explodes, it turns everything into ash. I merely tweaked a few things to make use of the truth-seeking ball's power. That jutsu will turn everything covered in the light into ash, everything, nothing remains. It would still fail against natural chakra though. A splendid jutsu. Kotaro said as the group continued to converse while surrounded by a cloud of dust that Naruto had created in his crash landing. This coupled with the jutsu the Emperor had just released, didn't make things calm in the village. Iwagakure with the peace destroyed, replaced by a tense atmosphere as the civilians waited for the dust to clear just so they could see who it was that had dared scare them like that. Hearts were racing in fearful anticipation as the shadows became visible, but the dust kept them from seeing the clear images of the people, shinobi who had crash landed. It took a few moments for everything to settle down, but when it did, there was a shout that tore through the street. It's the Emperor. He has come to do what he did to Konoha. Civilians were cowards and a fearful bunch by nature, well most of them anyway. The reaction of abandoning everything to run for their lives was nothing but natural. The Emperor and his generals were not the least surprised to see such cowardice from these people. Who could, except the spineless and weak humans, stand before the sight of the Emperor? A foolish man lacking a third of his brain function. Even enemy shinobi would run away from the sight of the Emperor. Who could forget what he did to the great village of Konohagakure no Sato? Civilians may be cowards and weak, but they knew that Konoha had been the strongest hidden village since its founding. Hell, even if Iwagakure was pitted against Kumogakure, it wouldn't win because of Kumo's mass numbers. Konoha was better than the two and had great shinobi amongst its ranks who could compete with their kage in a fair battle. Even now they still have the twin perfects who could disarm and utterly crush any army they so choose. Even so, those twin perfects hadn't even tried attacking the Imperial Rice Kingdom, not even Jiraiya, nor Tsunade. They stayed away from watering conflict with the Emperor. They tried making the situation between the Rice and Konoha tolerable and in such a way that the Emperor wouldn't wake up one day and feel like destroying the village, again. Konoha had no answer to the Emperor's power, not even Kumogakure attempted anything. So they could be excused for running scared when the man crashed down in their midst. With recent events having occurred within Empire, It was only logical that he'd come here for one thing and one thing only, retribution. Within minutes, the streets had already cleared of the civilians and shinobi of Iwagakure had surrounded the five. Naruto was wearing the usual royal white kimono with all four of his generals standing beside him, now facing the Tsuchikage. They had been quick to mobilize, which meant one thing. They'd been waiting for this day to arrive. They'd been making preparations for this day, for the day the emperor decided to descend down the land for retribution. Wasn't that pretty? This is quite the welcome, Haisuke said, glancing all sides to look at any who might try anything while His Majesty was still absorbed in his thoughts. Shinji nodded. I only wish that His Majesty would allow us to take part in this party. It seems like it will be fun, given that the Tsuchikage seems more than ready for the challenge. A pity His Majesty won't leave any of the fun, now said, shaking his head slightly. An attack on the Imperial Kingdom is an attack on the Emperor. I could understand why he wishes to do this himself, but there is still plenty of fights we can have. Yes, this is an entire village, after all, Kotaro added with a nod. It might be so, but His Majesty doesn't have a problem with numbers. Remember the battle in Kurigakure during the Civil War. To add to that, he faced Konohagakure on his own, though, in that level of power, he was absolute, untouchable. Yes, no one could touch him in that level. The man had been invincible after consumption of the Jubi's power. However, things were a bit different back then. His Majesty won't let us get involved, not until he has completed what he wishes, Shinji said. Danga, why do you think he even bothered taking us to this place if he isn't going to leave the battle to us? The barrier wasn't actually needed as the Emperor could simply teleport those he wishes to do battle with to another dimension. We have not yet actually seen him battle, but we know that he is indeed powerful. None of us doubt that, but I think His Excellency wishes us to see him in a battle. Though, I don't think this will be much of a challenge, Haisuke said, before adding. This will be good to prove to the nations that His Majesty is still without a peer in terms of power, nevertheless. As his generals continued their talk like he wasn't present, Naruto stared into the heavens, ignoring everything that was beside him, and around him. What did he want in this corrupted world of shinobi? What was it that he was living for? His grandfather may have been a twisted psycho, but he still had a noble dream. Methods were questionable, but the dream was noble nonetheless. Minato had his dream, the Shodai Hokage had his own dream, everyone seems to have a dream, but what about him? He was Uchiha Naruto, a sage. He was the only true sage living in this world. Jiraiya was a sage. Because of his use of natural chakra taught him by the Toad Sage. But he wielded everything that made Hagoromo a sage. Yet, he was still not in the clear about another, side, dream. He wanted to end his living in harmony. He had realized it earlier that without showing the world his power, he would never be free from their sight. Destruction and submission was the only way for them to understand. If words weren't enough for them to understand that he wished no trouble with them, then he would force them to submission. They weren't going to leave him alone until his time expired. The only way to live through it all was for them to be forced to submit. Being nice was only causing him a headache. A more brutal method was needed then. What about the side dream then? It could start with the destruction that was to follow today. He had no interest in being a peace seeker, but he had every interest in ensuring that the world was stable for him to live without troubles. But the current world wouldn't allow it, hence it needed to be changed. Onoki growled looking at the destruction the Emperor had brought upon with just one jutsu. How could that man do something like this? The jutsu released had caused much destruction, scared his people, and killed some. He couldn't confirm the number of casualties, but there were dead people, and they had yet to even start fighting. You haven't changed at all. Onoki started looking down at the Emperor. This has become a bad habit for you. You always charge straight into enemy territory, trusting that your power will overwhelm everything. Naturally, this behavior makes you predictable, and makes it quite easy to prepare a battle strategy. He was a little surprised that the man would come here with his subordinates. He hadn't planned for this, but he would have to deal with it. At least the man hadn't brought either Nagato or Sasuke. It would have been troublesome if Naruto had brought Nagato. His forces had tangled with the man, and he knew the man was much more of a threat. Disappear, Naruto said to his subordinates, who quickly vanished into thin air. Don't bother looking for them. They won't get involved, you only have to worry about me. It wouldn't be fair if you have to worry about them too. Still full of yourself, I see, Onoki remarked a bit bitterly. While this was better for him, it still bothered him greatly that the man had the balls to look down on them like this. He was a cage, and no one dared look down on him like this, yet this man did it without a second thought. Why wouldn't I be full of myself, Onoki? He was Uchiha Naruto, the man without an equal. But let us not get into that. I have to say, I am rather disappointed that you chose to involve civilian life in your battle with me. Those people hadn't done anything, yet you had them killed anyway. What was the thought? A couple of hundreds for my death. I'm not going to get into that kind of conversation with you, Onoki said. But just for the sake of it, I am not heartless like you. I just did what I thought was necessary, and I understand that in the shinobi world, sacrifices have to be made. Who gives you the right to sacrifice other people, Onoki? You went even far by doing that to people of another man's country. What you did was kill my people. Sacrifices when you come before me and let me kill you easily so that I don't do any harm to your village. Naturally, he wouldn't accept it even if the man offered, not after what he did. Enough of this. You refuse to even reason with me, Naruto shook his head disappointedly. Fine then, let the retribution games begin. He was just going to see what these people had planned for him. The truth-seeking balls disappeared as his eyes glowed. A bit. Shinra Tensei. Boom. A loud explosion rocked through the streets, destroying a few buildings that surrounded Naruto. The explosion had left a sizable crater down on the ground. The jutsu used had been given enough power to destroy a few things and leave its mark down on the ground, so that they could know that the emperor had been present in this village. The first mark was just to announce his presence, and this one was to leave his stamp. Before the dust caused by the explosion could disappear, hundreds of kunai were flung towards Naruto, a second after he sent forth his Shinra Tensei. The Rinnegan could effectively see that the kunai were marked with explosive tags, and had been thrown after consideration of the 5-second time gap between the next jutsu. The tags went off. Another explosion went off. Difference was that this one was filled with red flames, producing enough heat to force the hundreds of Iwa forces away from the explosion. Onoki was thankful that civilians had been evacuated from the area, as it would have caused great panic. Well, as long as they could hear the fireworks, they would panic, but this way made it easy for them to battle without worrying over them. When the flames died down, Naruto was completely unharmed, standing in the middle of the crater, hands folded across his chest. I see you learned a thing or two from the previous stage. However, you mustn't forget that the Rinnegan isn't the only dojutsu I can use. You can think of ways to maneuver the Rinnegan, but I still have the Sharingan. He paused for a moment. Shall W. The ground beneath him started shaking before 4 hands bust from the ground, catching both the emperor's feet. The others didn't waste time before they threw in an attack straight the held-down emperor. They were tempting him to use the Rinnegan's power just so Onoki could hit him with that particle-style jutsu. The jutsu that was pushed towards him was an earth spikes jutsu. Hundreds of spikes were flung from all directions. If he used the Rinnegan to blow everything away, they would just use the gap between the next jutsu to attack him. He didn't want to give away cheap shots by doing something stupid. When faced with situations like these, he had to think, and that is exactly what he was doing. To save himself from being pierced by the spikes, Naruto channeled chakra through his held feet. Large wooden roots bust from the ground, all around the emperor. They formed something like a dome around him. The rain of earth spikes crashed down on Naruto, but could only crumble when hitting the reinforced wooded roots. The roots crumbled down when the flood stopped. Naruto found himself surrounded by 5 shinobi, all on the ground, hands touching down. His eyes narrowed down when red marks began spreading around him. He still couldn't move because the hands, that felt like rocks, kept their hold on him. Being familiar with Fuinjutsu, it didn't take a while for the Sharingan to decipher the fact that he was standing on a landmine. Disc. They were prepared. Onoki was floating just above the ground, facing him, waiting for him to use the Rinnegan. It was as if the old man thought the only way to counter his jutsu was through the Rinnegan. Boom. The very ground Naruto stood on blew up in a screamer for an explosion. The ground had shook when the thing went out in a bang. A large mushroom of debris and flames picked up when the landmine went off. Not a second later, Naruto shot out of the debris, Kimono burned from feet up to his waist, but no damage on his body. Iwa shinobi appeared above him, limiting his options. Though they didn't attack, the emperor was still forced to hastily land down the ground. The moment he landed, nasty earth hands grabbed his feet, with so much force that he felt his feet grow cold. Marks spread across his body, and even when it had only been a second or so that his body grew numb, it was still enough for his opponents to act. Two shinobi flashed both his sides, each grabbed his hands, binding him with shackles. They made their distance with both the emperor's hands stretched out wide, and feet still held. Onoki was smirking. As you can see, we're prepared to handle you, he said. So far, they'd been putting the emperor on the defense, and it was only a matter of time before they land a fatal hit. It seems that way, Naruto acknowledged. They must be ready by now, he said. A second later, a red barrier formed around the hundreds of shinobi that had surrounded Naruto. It was only a small number compared to the thousands of shinobi that Iwagakure possessed. But these were the ones who would perish along with their master. What is going on? Onoki demanded from his man. The barrier was dangerous, he knew it. Touch it and you were going to burn. He had prepared to create something like this as his hunt to capture Naruto continued. But the formation of this barrier was not on his command. It is not one of us, Tsuchikage-sama. Communication with the outside has also been cut off. Onoki gritted his teeth and stared back at the emperor. So you came here with a plan. Iwagakure possesses a lot of shinobi, and even I can't fight all of them equally when they are coordinating their attacks. You've studied my fighting style and know what to expect, so fighting head-on would be disastrous for me, the emperor stated. These few hundreds will compensate for the few hundreds you killed. Do you think you can kill all of us? It is not a matter of thought, Onoki. I can, the emperor said before a heavy force of unnatural energy crashed down on the barrier, snapping the chains, and shattering the ground. The emperor stood. Amaterasu, he said as the black flames lit up on the ground, around him. He snapped his fingers and a portal opened up just above him. The clone that always carries his truth-seeking balls appeared from the portal. It dropped off the balls and disappeared. Naruto took 2 steps forward before he blurred out of sight. He appeared directly in front of Onoki. The speed had been so fast that the cage's subordinates were unable to react in time when the emperor made his appearance. A black mass formed around the two, enveloping them. What the, shish, Naruto whispered. I assure you that you want to hear this, the emperor said. Outside the black cocoon, Naruto had left 4 truth-seeking balls, one for each corner, and all of them were going to set off simultaneously and kill all the men inside the barrier. Boom. Onoki heard it, and it was rather resounding. It felt like a tailed beast bomb had been set off. It was only the fact that he didn't sense any Biju chakra that he was able to say that it wasn't a tailed beast bomb. He knew that no Biju existed at this stage as Naruto had somehow made sure that they all disappeared. His men had searched all nations looking for them, but he accepted that they may be no more. As the cocoon opened up, Onoki could stare wide-eyed as he saw the result of the explosion that was set off by Naruto's truth-seeking balls. None of his forces were alive. There was nothing but a large crater inside the barrier and some residual heat coming from the explosion. How could that have happened? What kind of powers here at work here? He had gravely underestimated things here. Things have gone awfully wrong. The emperor didn't try to amuse himself by challenging them to a battle, he didn't try to fight. Perhaps he saw that no one was capable of putting up a fight. And the best thing to do was just cause destruction. The Sandaime Tsuchikage cursed his fate. You thought that a Bijumuda had been set off by the explosion, but it wasn't. The explosion was set off by something more powerful than the tailed beast bomb, Naruto started. I did say that these few hundreds would compensate for the few hundreds you killed. I wanted to leave this village destroyed beyond recognition. However, I'm feeling merciful today. I will do as you did, kill a few hundreds and destroy some things. I will also crush you for the murders. Onoki wasn't facing the emperor when he spoke. He was busy trying to feel if there were any survivors left. But he couldn't sense anything. He couldn't see anything. But he was relieved when the ground began to shook at the far left corner. Around 30 shinobi bust out from the ground. He sighed thankfully. They must have buried themselves deep underground to avoid the blast, he thought mildly. This was good. I will surely make you pay for this, Uchiha. Onoki snapped his head towards Naruto. His body froze when he saw the look on the emperor's face. It wasn't a blank, impassive expression, or that look of indifference. It was something akin to a powerful man who wasn't happy. He couldn't say the emperor looked downright pissed, but he could say that he wasn't the least happy. Naruto tilted his head a little. You, Onoki, the third Tsuchikage, make me pay. For what exactly, Onoki? You provoked me by killing hundreds of civilians and attacked the city of Sound. Is it not right that I seek to punish you after I'd warned you off such foolish actions? Onoki wasn't going to be drawn into an argument where he would have to defend his choices or justify his actions. I never walked into your country, and I didn't cause this much stir, he said. However, look around you, do you think you will be able to survive if they all attack you second after second? Indeed, there were at least around 1,000 of strong shinobi gathered around the barrier. It seemed like there was a great spectacle that was being watched by the shinobi forces of Iwagakure. They'd surely turned the field of play into a stadium of some sort. Kuretsuchi was leading the remaining forces, but didn't seem like she was thrilled to get into battle. Only that first round was thrown because you did not wish to have all your forces into battle with once, and against a single opponent. Understandable. A wise choice for a cage, Naruto stated, still keeping that unhappy look. Though, I would have wiped out all who dared attack me. Onoki snorted, recovered his might, and stood still. The unhappy look of the emperor still unnerved him, but he couldn't do much about it. I see your arrogance has no limits, he said. Particle style. Atomic dismantling jutsu. Naruto disappeared from his position, appearing a distance away from the Tsuchikage. His movement was influenced by the desire to disappear from the range of Onoki's attack. This only gave chance for the remaining forces to move into the side of their cage. Your technique requires one to be still for you to completely ensnare the opponent. I am, however, not the slowest, and my sense of chakra is at the level where I can sense any buildup of chakra. I can tell you what you're going to do next by the type of chakra building inside of you. He was a sage, and it was only natural that he knew all nature transformations of chakra. Besides, the part of his self that had been the first human to possess chakra was still living inside of him. It was only the fact most of his being was sealed in the moon that he couldn't completely negate all forms of ninjutsu without the use of bijudamas. Onoki didn't immediately respond to the statement by the emperor. He looked at his man and smiled when he saw that a vital part of his plan was still alive. He wouldn't have awaited the emperor without going through everything in order to battle him and come out victorious. Like you said, I've studied your fighting style and I know exactly what is needed to fight you. Ninjutsu requires large amounts of chakra to be burned, but you make ninjutsu useless. Taijutsu is a little different. Natural energy is something that we haven't tried though. I didn't think that you had anyone with the capabilities to absorb natural energy. Normally summons are required for the learning of senjutsu, but Hashirama didn't possess a summon yet managed to wield sage chakra. Could you have found a way to tap into nature? He could use natural chakra because he was a sage, and a part of the Jubi was in him, so it was only natural for him. I won't get into details, he wouldn't want to reveal any secrets to the man. However, things will go differently from now on. A man stepped forward. He was of a big build, showed a lot of muscles, and was wearing black pants that fitted well with his lower body, and a black shirt that showed his bulky chest. The man held his hands together, closed his eyes for concentration. Naruto merely watched in mild curiosity. He was intrigued when overwhelming power surged from the shinobi. A dark brown aura surrounded the man. Oh my! Naruto trailed off when the black-haired man suddenly vanished into thin air. His eyes looked up as the man appeared above him, crashing down with right fist towards him. Shin! The man suddenly disappeared from his view before he could even finish his jutsu. The man's feet crashed down the ground just in front of him. A right punch connected with his chest with so much force that there was a resounding boom that rocked through the barrier. This is going to be interesting, Naruto said, his head cocked to the left side. That punch actually made him feel pain. But pain wasn't something that made him worry. He was highly tolerant to the feeling. Naruto's opponent rushed at his side with so much speed that the emperor couldn't help but be amazed. Still, he couldn't afford to waste any moves because as the opponent charged, but others were waiting up on him to take advantage of any chance of momentarily lapse or the gap between his jutsu when using the Rinnegan. A faster opponent made it rather difficult to use ninjutsu, At least he didn't have to worry about hand seals as he didn't necessarily need them to execute his jutsus. The black-haired man seemed to know about the Sharingan's ability to predict moves as he appeared in the front before flashing behind the Emperor, and he again flashed into the right side of the Emperor, slightly above ground, twisted clockwise and launched a kick straight at Naruto's temple. The Emperor caught the kick with both his hands, but the shock and force from the kick managed to push him back slyly, still holding his opponent's foot. "You're using your hands," the man said, looking impassive. As he had noted, the Emperor had relented in using his hands a few moments ago when he first attacked, but now he was forced into bringing them out to play. "The situation requires that I do so. I never said anything about not raising them. I merely dislike raising them to deal with foolish children." As he spoke, black flames formed around his feet, surrounding him. They stayed grounded. "That means I'm doing something right then." Naruto didn't respond as he sensed two shinobi behind him. When his left eye snapped to the attention, the two were really close to him, both holding swords, trying to take advantage of the fact that both his hands were held up. He twisted around forcefully, still holding the foot of his opponent with both his hands, and sent the man crashing into the other two. The two were sent back as they collided with the heavy man who was flung by the Emperor. The Emperor was forced to twist back again as another shinobi rushed towards him through the ground. Being faster, he took a few steps forward before slamming his right foot into the man's gut, and sent him crumbling backwards. Not more than a second later, two more flashed just above him. The Emperor didn't do hand seals when he spat out flames. Great Fireball no Jutsu, the large fireball clashed with the shinobi head-on, consuming their flesh in one go. A second didn't pass as his opponent returned to the offense. Once again, some invisible punches were sent straight at his back. They had been so fast that it would have required the truth-seeking balls to block, but Naruto had already sent them away to the clone on his core dimension. The punches crashed onto him like hot wind bullets. They were hot enough to burn through his kimono and leave a mark. Three more shinobi were upon him again, surrounding all his sides, while holding kunai. Naruto's eyes could see were engraved with explosive tags. The Emperor muttered two words, Shinra Tensai. The blast sent the men crashing away. His real opponent was up in him again, behind him, right foot cleaving through the high air, aim being his head. The Emperor ducked under the kick, but couldn't attack because the moment he ducked under, a clone of Onoki bust out of the ground, hands held together. Particle style. Atomic dismantling jutsu. This had happened within seconds. It took all of Naruto's might to get away from the path jutsu. He disappeared in a flash of black and appeared a few feet away. His opponent was upon him the second he landed on the ground. Naruto reacted by catching both kicks that were sent his way. "I was not fast enough," he said to himself, while looking at the mark that was leaking some blood on his now bare chest. He looked at his opponent, straight into the eyes. "Your intel is lacking. Before I started using ninjutsu to the public eye, I was hailed, feared even, for my taijutsu. You see, I trained my body in order to compete with any speed, to be able to react in time to follow through the predictions given by the Sharingan. Are you suggesting that you can compete with me? I don't need competition, not from the likes of you," the Emperor said with a shrug. "Amaterasu," he set the man ablaze. While the flames surrounded the man, Naruto threw him away. Naruto looked at the remaining forces. "I haven't finished all of you," he sounded disappointed, somewhat. Sighing, he folded his hands across chest. "What should I do now? I want to get this over with quickly. Bastard. Don't take us lightly." The careless attitude was just annoying and frustrating to someone who was giving his all. The Iowa shinobi who'd yelled those words rushed quickly at the Emperor holding a sword. He never reached his target though. The eternal black flames were upon him, and unlike how they normally did, they burned his body completely in a matter of seconds. Naruto did a few hand seals. Mokuten, deep forest burst. The ground shook within the barrier, and a forest began busting out from the ground all over barrier. Onoki growled. "It should be ready," he said before going down to stand on the forest Naruto created. He then sped through hand seals. Kuchio's no jutsu. A mechanical weapon appeared in a puff of smoke. Naruto frowned slightly. They'd rebuild Karen's weapon. The machine stood like a machine gun, one big chakra cannon launcher. Onoki smirked. "This is our trump card. What you don't know is that this weapon has been gathering natural energy since you came." No man in my village can absorb natural chakra, but this weapon can. This is why he didn't want Karen building weapons. To be honest, I'm quite shocked that Karen's weapon could do something like this, Naruto said, though you'd be inclined to think otherwise given the smile on his face. I will meet you in hell Uchiha. Onoki shouted before hitting the red button. The weapon shot a single beam of white energy towards Naruto, but when it was halfway there, the beam broke off to several beams that all headed toward the Emperor. Truth-seeking balls will be useless and I can't summon them in time. No time to summon a perfect Susanoo. No time to perform any jutsu either. Naruto though quickly as the beams closed in on him with unbelievable speed. No more thought passed in him because the beams collided with him, resulting in a huge explosion that tore through the forest he had created. Onoki merely watched the cloud of dust and wooded splinters settle down, waiting to see the results of his trump card. When everything finally cleared, Onoki could only widen his eyes. Naruto was still breathing, much to the shock of the least 1,000 shinobi watching from outside the barrier. It wasn't supposed to be. The weapon had enough power to destroy an entire village. The Emperor was down on his knees on the center of a large crater, kimono burned, chest exposed and leaking blood all over, but the holes in his body quickly filled up, stopping the bleeding. Naruto gave a bloody grin. I haven't felt so much pain since my battle with Madara and Sasuke, and haven't seen so much blood coming from my body, he said, panting slightly. Onoki charged at Naruto, particle style, atomic dismantling jutsu. Naruto merely raised his right hand, absorbing the jutsu. How are you alive? How can you generate your wounds like you're immortal? Onoki was still mindful to keep his distance when Naruto straightened up, held out his index finger. I can also use natural chakra, Onoki. Naruto blurred out of sight and appeared just in front of Onoki who was still in shock. Naruto didn't touch Onoki, but the mere look of his eyes made the cage freeze, literally. It wasn't because of fear, but something was just holding him back. I was going to crush you back at my palace, but I have changed my mind. An unbelievable amount of force crashed down on Onoki, sending him rocketing to the ground. The Tsuchikage let out a sound when his body brutally slammed down the unforgiving ground. Naruto eyed the weapon for a second, and then it exploded. He turned his attention towards Onoki once more, and began to descend slowly. Once he touched the ground, he began to slowly walk towards the fallen Tsuchikage. A pity your men have to watch you die, but it will be good to have their morale reduced. Bansho Tenin, the Sandaime Tsuchikage was pulled towards Naruto's waiting palm, his neck was grabbed tightly by the Emperor. No time wasted as Naruto slammed the fragile old man down the ground in brutal fashion. Naruto didn't mind the shrill. He snapped his fingers and a portal opened above the Tsuchikage. A chakra rod shot straight at his left shoulder, another followed to the other shoulder. Once again, the Emperor ignored the Tsuchikage's cries of pain. He shot another rod straight at Onko's gut, and lastly shot two more. One pierced through the forehead and another went through the heart. This was troubling. Naruto merely said as he watched the Tsuchikage breathe his last breath. As the barrier began to fade, Naruto looked up at the sky and a few moments later, his men appeared beside him. Not minding anything, now spoke, this should send a clear message to the other nations who wish to walk in the same path as the third Tsuchikage. But should Kuretsuchi take charge, we might not have to fight Iwagakure further, unless there is a rebellion, Shinji said. Your Majesty, Haisuke, was there another reason for this mission? I'm led to believe that with how you handled things with Kuretsuchi from the beginning, you never planned on fighting this village. You've always wanted Onoki removed from power. Speculations be speculations, Naruto simply said. Not minding that he was surrounding more than 1,000 of shinobi. I've just removed a weak link, he said. Go, I will follow shortly. All did a hi before flashing out of existence. I should leave as well, Naruto said to himself. Kuretsuchi caught the eyes of the Emperor for a few moments before speaking through gritted teeth. Leave, or I will order all of my men to attack. Kuretsuchi-sama, we cannot allow this man to leave like this. He took our Tsuchikage and killed our comrades, he must not be allowed to leave. There were many nods of agreement around the men. Some didn't want to fight so they refused to say anything. Kuretsuchi gave the man who dared question her orders a stern glare, but for all who dared to look, tears were rolling down her cheeks. My grandfather is dead. We've lost hundreds already. Don't you think that is enough? That man hasn't even used his Susanoo. Do you think Iwagakure will survive if he goes all Konoha on us? I'm thinking of what is best for this village, but if you think I'm wrong, be my guest, be the first to charge and land a hit, then I will follow you, and maybe we will defeat him, and maybe this village will remain standing. However, should you fail, and Iwa suffers more damage, I swear I will mutilate you with my teeth. Naturally, the man didn't attack. He took comfort in the numbers, and if that was taken away from him, it was no different than being made to parade through the busy streets while naked. A more rational mind of an Anbu spoke, allowing him to leave now is the best option. The third is gone, and engaging him will only lead to more destruction and casualties. We need to regroup. Besides, have you forgotten that innocent civilians are just away from us? And this isn't a battleground, but our beloved village. He had to give the emperor some credit though. Storming into this village may be seen as foolish and actions led by arrogance, but it wasn't like that. The emperor knew exactly what he was doing. If they'd met outside the village, an even greater battle would have ensured as they would be fighting without care. In here, they had to limit their numbers and remember that they were inside their home. If they caused destruction, they would have to rebuild afterwards. Fighting here minimized everything. If they'd fought outside, the emperor would have been forced to bring his own into the battleground. Inside the village, he looked like a fool while everything worked according to plan. They were the fools, and the emperor was walking away with victory dancing joyfully above his shoulders, while they were left to shoulder their losses. Later, Emperor, now called to the black-haired Naruto, who was sitting on a tree branch, overlooking at village down the mountain. He and the others were down on the ground going through a few things. What will happen in Iwagakure now? Kuretsuchi won't become our enemy, but you said most of the village won't fight us, back at the capital. Rebellion, Shinji said looking up at the green leaves that obstructed his view of the clouds up in the sky. That is likely the case, isn't it, Your Majesty? Naruto gave a small nod, but said nothing further. What do you mean by that, Shinji? A rebellion will destroy Iwa and I don't think those people would go that far. Aside from their stubbornness, they share another common trait, a love for their village, Haisuke countered, thinking that they would not do anything that will provoke a civil war. Kotaro nodded, agreeing with Haisuke's view. A rebellion will cause a civil war that would break Iwagakure apart in a short time. The village may be big, but considering everything, it won't take much for it to break apart. What do you think, Heika? Is this what you wanted? Naruto took his time before he responded. He didn't have to hurry anything. Time was on his side. Kuretsuchi will not order her forces to attack the empire. She will try to form an alliance that her grandfather failed to form, in secret though. Since she is going to be installed as the new Tsuchikage, her council will likely try to push her to attack. But she will stand firm and try to reason. There will be divisions amongst her council, just as there is in the forces. Those unsatisfied will likely go against her orders, and there will be little she can do about it because she knows if she does anything, there is likely going to be a fight, now added. Iwa's forces have been trained harder than any of the other villages' forces, and won't be easy to do with. I'm saying this because in the coming days, the forces who wish to pick a fight with us will leave Iwagakure, and that woman won't stop them. If she does, a battle will break out, harming her village. Naruto said before adding. The assassins who will leave the village will likely run in separate groups to make it easy to move around. From there, they will likely be attacking all of our allies. Their attacks on us will spike other nations to follow suit. We can expect them to be coming from all directions, Haisuke said. So our attack has sparked the war to begin. The war begun when Onoki committed genocide on the innocent, the emperor said. This is Moyagakure. The leader of this village is responsible for my attack, and their shinobi are the ones who scouted our borders for Iwa's safe passage. They've also recently created a weapon using stolen technology from the hot springs. I will disable the weapon and you will fight. Don't kill anyone. Just disable them. The leader must be torn to pieces though. What kind of weapon is it, Heika? Watch me as I attack. They are expecting us and civilians have already been evacuated. After I disable the weapon, you'll be free to rain down the village. Hi. Naruto stood up before he vanished, the generals disappeared as well. Meanwhile, while it wasn't official as of yet, Kuretsuchi was the new Tsuchikage for Iwagakure. It pained her, she wanted nothing more than to cry for her grandfather, but if she did that, the village would be turned into chaos. She didn't want thousands to be marching around the village aimlessly, wondering about their future, thinking illogical thoughts. She wanted the village to be stable. There may be a hole punched through in her heart, but she had to keep all that covered for the sake of her village. Her grandfather wasn't going to turn up alive any second now. She had already known his death was only imminent when he decided to kill the innocent people of the Rice Kingdom. Karen had only put a stamp in her fears, but the reality of it occurring crushed the little hope she had, the little string she had attached to comfort herself. Emotionally, Kuretsuchi was flat. Physically, she was drained and probably needed one of the good-hour drugs to push some adrenaline through her bloodstream and maybe drip in some poison to make her mind rest from the miles it has been doing since the emperor dropped down on the village. When faced by arrogant and ignorant, talk about a bad combination, old farts, Kuretsuchi felt like she was pushing a mountain and carrying an Earth-size meteorite. Her feet were having troubles even pushing up as her joints were shaking with all the overwhelming load that had been forced upon her young shoulders. Why did you allow that man to leave, Kuretsuchi? That arrogant man was in our front yard. Our shinobi could have captured him if you hadn't been a coward and allowed him to walk out freely. You may have as well have escorted him out of the village after making a foolish decision like that. That man was outnumbered massively, and our forces are nothing like the flies he dealt with in Kurigakure during its civil war. We could have apprehended him for the invasion. Lord Tsuchikage was murdered before your very eyes. How will you live with yourself knowing that your grandfather suffered before your very eyes and you did nothing to save him? He may even be cursing your very name as we speak. You let the enemy get away without attempting to fight. How do you call yourself a leader? If you had, finally exploding like a hot balloon, Kuretsuchi raised her voice sternly, shut up. And then there was silence, but the glares didn't go away. The fourth, Tsuchikage leaned back to her chair, glancing all her sides while leveling the fools a very nasty look that promised the unspeakable. If any of you question my love for my grandfather again, I swear by my dead mother that I will starve you and then bury you, alive. No one responded, from the ones all throwing irrational twists in her face. Kuretsuchi, why did you allow the emperor to leave after he invaded our village, killed hundreds of our men and murdered the Tsuchikage? Hundreds were not a major loss that dug a deep hole in their shinobi forces, but it was something that shouldn't be taken lightly, especially when it was done in the yard. When the emperor only chose to fight the men my grandfather had, I realized that he was only in the village to do good on the promise he delivered to him through Karen. The emperor had warned my grandfather that he would come to the village to punish him for the foolish action he took. I chose not to engage him when I saw that he was done with what he had come to do. If I had chosen to fight him, in our village, with the numbers we have and his destructive power, there wouldn't have been any village standing after the battle. So even if we'd won, there wouldn't have been a village left, and we would have lost most of our men. What would you rather have, a ruin like Konoha with demoralized shinobi or a standing village with the opportunity to fight another day? The words sunk in with some force, but they reached where they were supposed to. They had to look at the bigger picture rather than trying to nurse their petty pride by sending the village into collapse. Her grandfather had brought this upon them, even when she had strongly tried to persuade him otherwise. I understand your point of view, a more logical mind spoke. But what are we going to do about this situation? We can't let this slide not by all chance. You fail to realize something. You fools endorsed the attack on civilians, what did you expect? Kuretsuchi shouted with all her strength, right fist smashing into the table in front of her. Tell me, what did you think was going to happen when you supported the choice to murder innocent people, who were led by that man? I swear if you give me a reasonable answer like, we didn't expected him to rush over here to exact revenge, I will throw you into a dark cell deep under this tower for instigating the situation we are in right now. You can't blame us for this. I can and I am. You supported the choice to provoke that man, and this is what happens when you provoke him. If you people had just left that man alone, none of this would have happened. But you just couldn't let things be. And now look what has happened. Her stern gaze pierced through their eyes, just as her voice shook things in their minds. You screwed up, and now let me fix things my way. She stood up to leave for some personal space. While she does have a point, we can't exactly let this slide without punishment. Something has to be done before our image is tarnished. How will other villages look at us if one man was able to enter our village, kill hundreds of our men and kill our Tsuchikage? One of the councilmen said, earning nods from some. As Kuritsuchi paced around the Tsuchikage's office, having left the council room, her movements halted in front of the desk her stupid grandfather used to occupy. She was burdened, broken inside, and he wasn't here. They may have had differences lately, but he was her grandfather, she really needed him for moral support. Where was he now that she needed him? He'd run away, into the hands of his enemy, leaving her to fend for herself. Stupid, stubborn old man. Kuritsuchi yelled to no one in particular. I warned you, I told you not to do stupid things but you didn't listen. You went ahead with your crazy ideas, look where it has brought us. Some part of her tormented heart wished the old man could hear her. Why won't you answer me, damn it? She shouted again. Kuritsuchi grabbed the chair in front of her, and smashed it at the desk. She did again, and once more again until there was nothing left of the chair. Finally, she slowly crumbled down on her butt. Why? The question was an echo that sounded deep inside the walls of her heart. No plausible answer came, nothing that was fulfilling slid into her heart, nothing that would make her shattered soul be whole again. The old man would have been here with her, complaining about back pains, load of work, saying that he was too old for this shit, yet couldn't quit his job and let her do it. Perhaps he just wanted to go out with a bang. A few drops of tears fell onto her lap. Back at Moyojikure, the emperor landed down in one of the buildings in the village. The eternal Mangekyo Sharingan observed the layout while he stood still. It almost looked like it was empty. Civilians had been evacuated far away from the village for safety. The fools of this village were willing to turn the village into a battleground. It was quite the feeling that gripped his cold heart. Just knowing that a battlefield had been prepared for his appearance. Better get this over. Why? His eyes caught something moving fast, behind him. Even though the Sharingan predicted the path of the thing, he couldn't twist his body fast enough to face it. A red arrow came upon him in an instant. The emperor tried to sidestep the arrow that was heading straight for his forehead. He wasn't fast enough as the arrow managed to cut bits of his hair just above his left ear before exploding upon the contact. Naruto appeared unharmed as he landed behind the building he'd been on. As he leaned against the wall, his prior thought was now confirmed. He couldn't just charge straight ahead. He needed to move with speed and elegance or else he would be harmed. His senses became alert when two more arrows, bigger than him in length, appeared. It didn't take more than half of a second for them to reach his closest proximity. Naruto was forced to jump up the ground, using his Sharingan's predicting ability to move just in time when the arrows were about to hit him. Remarkably, the arrows didn't collide, instead, they changed direction, looking for him, again. Fortunately enough, Naruto was able to get two firm roots to burst out from the ground. They were able to quickly catch the arrows before they could reach the emperor. The arrows still detonated in a resounding explosion, nonetheless. The explosion didn't form any flames or of energy, it created a strong shockwave that had enough force to shatter the glasses on the building and propel the emperor up in the air. If Naruto was a fan of cursing, he would have cursed at about now. A couple of black arrows crashed through the windows of the building opposite to the building he'd been leaning on for cover, and were heading straight at him. He couldn't use the same jutsu he used when dealing with Sasuke's arrows because these kind of arrows would explode right on his face. He wasn't positively sure, but wasn't keen on taking the chance either. His beloved gunbai appeared in front of him in a cloud of smoke. The moment his hand grabbed its handle, the black arrows crashed onto the face of his gunbai. They exploded with enough force to make the emperor crash through the 5-floor building, and onto the other side. The momentum came to a halt when he hit the wall of another building and managed to land on the ground, unharmed. This looks like it is going to be troublesome, he managed to crack a smile. Well, at least I might enjoy myself. Besides, I've sensed the general location of the weapon. Naruto could sense a number of chakra signatures around the ghost village, but no one was making a move towards him. For now, it seemed they were content with watching him dance to the beat of the weapon he could now safely assume was created from watching Sasuke's Susanoo. The arrows shot were the problem and different as they weren't exactly created from chakra. The emperor's senses went to work again as another large arrow targeted him. It was flying just above the ground with incredible speed. Its overwhelming speed was put into show by the debris that picked up after it had passed. Naruto didn't attempt to block it with his gunbai as it was a little bigger and he wanted to test something. The royal flicked his gunbai into the air and held out his right hand. He didn't use chakra as he had assumed the arrow was attracted to chakra and contact with the energy made it unstable, hence it exploded each time it contacted him. Chakra wasn't the only thing that set it off though. Because he didn't know everything, he decided to test his theory right about now. Naruto put several layers of wind walls in front of him. The layers weren't exactly as much as walls, but a cloud that formed a resistance. Wind already played a part in the movements of the arrow. It was a simple test of aerodynamics that Naruto was trying to pull off. The projectile could move faster, but with enough wind pressure, it would be slowed down. Naruto did exactly that but reinforcing the wind pressure in front of him. The pressure was enough to slow the arrow, but not completely stop it. The arrow was grabbed by a large wind hand when it was only inches away from the emperor. It didn't explode, which is what Naruto wanted to rest. However, judging by what he could feel, the arrow was still pushing towards him as his chakra still attracted it. That meant that as long as he had chakra in him, the thing would continue to hunt him. What made it worse was that he had large amounts of chakra, so it would avoid any other source and head for the one that dwarfs the others. Naruto jumped back just to be safe. The moment he landed on the ground, several more arrows appeared from above. Before he could even do anything, 4 more appeared from all sides, leaving him with no escape. In this kind of situation, there was only one thing to do. He held his right hand in a single hand seal before he started rotating, Uchiha flame rotation. The flames started pouring out. It wasn't just red flames, but black flames as well. The flames formed a swirling dome of black and red that produced a high level of intense heat. The burning of chakra did nothing more than force the arrows to come towards him in even greater speed, but Naruto had counted for that. The flames had enough heat to expel anything. The flames of Amaterasu helped quicken the pace. When the arrows connected with the dome, they all turned into one large explosion that destroyed parts of the buildings that surrounded the emperor. The flames had done more to intensify the explosion. When everything cleared, Naruto appeared without too much harm. His kimono just had some burns a bit. I was right choosing to deal with this myself. If I don't step up a bit, I will get more than just burns, the emperor said to himself. I lost concentration, he said in bit of a curse than anything. The arrow he'd caught with his wind hand had broken loose and was heading straight at him. He quickly threw the gunbai on his left hand into the air before disappearing in a flash holding its handle. Predictably, the arrow changed paths and swept up to him. Naruto reacted by flashing down the ground using his superior speed. The arrow still followed him though, but it mattered not as the emperor had bought himself enough time. Amaterasu. The flames were set ablaze around the arrow, but it didn't explode, as Naruto had predicted, nor did it stop. However, its movements did slow down a bit. This gave him enough time to bat the arrow away from him using his gunbai. Upon crashing into a building, the arrow exploded. Naruto didn't waste time as he started running deep into the village streets. Gunbai fully gripped, and a serious expression across his face. He didn't run far as an orange arrow zipped past him in blinding speeds, causing him to abruptly halt his movements. His eyes narrowed onto his right shoulder. His kimono was reddening with his blood, and he felt some tinges of discomfort. My blood. A smile found its way into his lips. Well, let's party then. Later as the sound of raging battles died down, Naruto looked ahead with a blank look on his face. Taking care of the weapon hadn't been very easy as he would have liked, but he wasn't complaining as he did some warm-ups, something he hasn't done in quite some time. Looking down the village that had turned into a ring of heavyweights when his generals advanced, the emperor could say he was pleased with the day's work. More scenes like this were going to fill up the elemental nations in the coming weeks. Fireworks of all kinds were going to be lit up and he had the front seat to all of it, while Hagoromo watched through a thick glass. It was wonderful feeling that tore through the chest of his. He wanted to laugh and light more fireworks, but he didn't do any of that, even when the little voice in him was urging him to do a victory dance. Heika, Haisuke started as he and the others flashed behind the emperor. From anyone looking, it was obvious that they had been in battle. The mission was a success, but there were a few things that got out of hand. He believed the man had already knocked as he'd been watching them ever since he blew the machine that was shooting arrows. The report had to be given nonetheless. We tore the leader apart, however, there were some casualties during the battle. We tried doing our best, but roughly 72% of the village's forces we engaged are still alive, and half of those may or may not fight again, Shinji added after Hisuke. There was some silence as Naruto kept quiet instead of responding. The men behind him merely continued to kneel, waiting for the emperor to make his response. Even though they were facing his back, they could safely guess the kind of expression that was on his face. They had seen much of the man in the past years and have learned much about how he behaved. I can see that, Naruto said in response as the Sharingan glanced in all sides of the burning village. It couldn't be helped. The weapon may be been threatening, but the shinobi themselves are a bit disappointing. What kind of a weapon was that Heika? It had successfully managed to pierce the emperor not once, or twice, and it had even managed to break through an incomplete Susanoo. The speed of the arrows had been frightening, but all was handled, but not without a scratch though. I don't know the specifications, but it seemed to have been created to destabilize chakra, and the arrows themselves weren't made of chakra. It was able to pass through the Susanoo because it was made of chakra, and upon contact, it destabilizes the chakra. This happens in an instance. I'd assumed it would explode upon contact with anything that is chakra, but I was wrong. The exploding part seemed to have been remotely controlled. My chakra system is a little different, and since I'm not the kind of person to lose control over my own chakra, I was able to fight off the effects of being pierced. However, it would have been a different story if they had pierced my tenketsu points, which given his kind of chakra system, were fewer than the normal shinobi. The generals took this with some silence, but before any could speak, Naruto stood up. I will see you at the capital. I have to make one last stop before I return. He disappeared into thin air after saying those words. Where do you think His Majesty has gone to see? Kotar asked the other three who didn't seem interested in asking the whereabouts of the emperor. Who knows? Hisuke said with a shrug while Shinji and Nao gave their own shrugs. Chapter 46 Unknown Location. How long had it been since he last came to this hideout? This had been his beginning, this was the beginning of Uchiha Naruto. Madara had made him in this place, he had cooked him here. Not completely though, but his beginning started here. The man who called himself his superior had dragged him into this pit, told him the truth for his own good and purpose, yet didn't teach him how to deal with his emotions. The only thing that the man was concerned about was his goal, his dream. Did he care about him? Maybe a little. It wasn't to say that Madara didn't care. He did care, it was just that nothing was going to stop him from reaching his goal, reaching the world he has dreamt of making so that he could live happily. The man had seen more than enough. His clansmen had died before his eyes, many people had died while fighting, for what exactly? You could never know. Worst of all, his beloved brother also died, he'd succumbed to the injuries he sustained while fighting the Nadaime. Naruto released a long breath as he leaned back on the mud chair Madara's wrinkled behind used to sit on. His left elbow was pressed against the chair's armpit while the hand was placed on the left cheek, his eternal Mangekyo Sharingan shining within the dimly lit space. His grandfather was probably laughing at him now, saying, I told you so. He was not going to rest effectively with these people trying to get rid of him. He had truly thought they would understand reason and a show of power, but they didn't understand anything, they didn't understand a damn thing. The cages who were attempting to fight him were fools who wanted nothing more than to affirm their positions as the strongest in the elemental nations. Uchiha Naruto had knocked them down a few levels and they wanted to reclaim their glory. Konoha no longer served as the strongest because he had reduced it. The Imperial Rice Kingdom of Emperor Naruto has become the strongest in the elemental nations. There was no country that could say anything to him. There was none. He had been patient with them and allowed them to walk with their heads held high while he minded his own business, but they didn't do that. They couldn't leave him alone. This was why he had to do things the hard way, this is why he must make them bow before him. He no longer cared for anything, but he would make opposing nations submit before the emperor. Hagoromo would say he knew it would come to this. But who cared what the sage thought? This was his time and he had given the world a chance to be itself, but it couldn't. They couldn't behave without him looking over their shoulders, and now he must do what must be done to get them to behave. Naruto cast his left eye at the passage from the side as he felt footsteps coming along the way. He closed his eyes until the person appeared before the presence of His Majesty. Once the footsteps had stopped just way from him, Naruto's eyes snapped open, still that dim blood red. Thinking something interesting, Naruto. Spiral Zetsu said, looking straight into the eye of the emperor. It was a surprise to see the man here, but he wasn't complaining about anything. Interesting. No, just something troubling, Naruto said. But that is emperor, Spiral. I thought you didn't care for such things. You wouldn't even care if your subordinates just call you Naruto, he wouldn't tell them to call him Naruto. But such things as titles didn't matter to the man as he wasn't glory seeking, he was just content with everyone knowing who was superior. I do now. If I'm going to be successful in my crusade, I must start acting like the emperor, Naruto said, a bit bemused by the thought of having everyone kneel before him when they enter the throne room. But it was something that needed to be done, he was going to be a commander. Ho! The great Uchiha Naruto thinks he may not succeed, Spiral Zetsu said. I'm sure even Madara would find this amusing. Yes, he would. He always believed that he was going to succeed in everything. A pity he ended up failing when his dream was staring right at him, Naruto said. Make no mistake, the emperor doesn't doubt himself. It is just a matter of words being put like that. Nothing becomes fun when you know you're always going to win. It's better to think there might be something challenging along the way. Is this why you went easy on Iwagakure or why you didn't bother to revive the people Onoki killed? Reviving those people shouldn't have been a problem for you nor for Nagato in his current state. Naruto went silent for a few moments before getting on to the other matter he'd come here for. What are you plotting with Obito? Ah, you caught on to that, huh? Don't do anything stupid, Spiral, or I will kill you, Naruto simply said. I'd brought Obito back to this world to show him pain, but it seems that I'm losing my grudge against the sad fool as the days pile on. You shouldn't plot with him. Spiral Zetsu cocked his head a little, kill me. Yes, Naruto said. My grandfather is dead, it should stay that way, and there is nothing that can be done to make Hagoromo appear into this world. You do know I'm not like Black Zetsu, right? Naruto got up from his seat and walked towards the spiral masked creature. His right hand pierced through the creature's chest in the blink of an eye. Arrogance will only get you so far. Spiral Zetsu blinked as he looked down at the hole in his chest. He was surprised that the hole wasn't filling up. More than that, it felt like something was eating him from the inside slowly. What the? Naruto removed his right hand, which was coated by a black mass. He allowed Spiral Zetsu to fall to the ground. Now then, I guess I better return home. Oddly, he felt something in him when he said, home, but he didn't dwell on the feeling for too long. There was much to do other than throwing himself into things that would need time for him to understand. Besides, the next move wasn't about feelings or anything akin, it was about the way forward. Royal Palace. As Naruto walked inside his dimly lit throne room, he was greeted by the eyes of Samui, who was sitting on the small crimson stairs that led up to his throne. The blonde-haired had her eyes fixed on his form, expression giving away nothing, as always. He didn't say anything to her. Not until he reached her and settled down on her right, choosing not to sit on his throne just this once as he sensed he was needed to be on her level just for this moment. I thought you would return earlier, Samui said. It was already late at night, and Naruto never stayed away from home this late. He was always at home. If not, she would be by his side. The mission had been completed some time ago as Haisuke and the others had returned much earlier when the sun was still alive. The generals could only say, His Majesty has other matters to deal with, when they were asked about the whereabouts of the absent emperor. He was supposed to have returned with his subordinates, but he didn't. Instead, he went off to handle other matters, which Samui could only play the guessing game. Naruto's crimson eyes looked at the empty space ahead of him. His stare was focused as though there was a puzzle he was trying to decipher with his eyes, but there was nothing but an empty void ahead of him, just a curious part. I had to visit the pit. I ended up staying there for some time while darkness played the staring contest with me. It wasn't planned that he stay in the hideout for more time than he wanted. There were just a lot of memories that he had in that place that it needed some time from his side to consider. And how has saying he has no time to join the sentimental train, but there he had been at a place that held some value to his wrecked heart. Most of the hideout had been destroyed, entrances closed, he'd just left a few things untouched, maybe in a moment of weakness. No need to guess who won the contest, Samui said. Solved anything? There was nothing to solve, Just passing through some thoughts. No self-doubt. I just had to clear my mind while revisiting the place I once saw as a home more than Konoha, Naruto said quietly. Any reason you were waiting for me here, alone? Samui fell silent for a few moments as she considered her thoughts. I've just been thinking about things, my life, your life, what I want, she said, staring down at the small stairs. Has there been anything bothering you recently? He wouldn't have noticed if there had been. Samui could hide her emotions very well. Yes. No. I don't know for sure, but I have some questions that have plagued my mind, Samui said. Naruto took his time before responding. Admittedly, I have failed to handle my personal life in a proper manner, and not in the way I would have liked. The emperor paused, shaking his head. This was not what Samui wanted, he thought mildly. What kind of questions? Before you answer, are you comfortable with talking here? Samui nodded, answering Naruto's second question. You know, I've always thought of living that happy life in a certain part of my life. I'm not growing younger, and as the days continue to pile on, I feel that I am losing the chance to be really doing something fun. She had been forced to leave her home village, and that wasn't a choice that had been easy to make before the exile. No matter what, Kumo would always be her home, she would always love the village, but with the coming events, the village may no longer accept her. No, when the Yondaime Raikage has chosen to be an enemy of the man sitting on her right, not when that same man was going to fight her former village in a bloody battle. Yugito's visits to her had now been toned down. The poor former Jinchuriki couldn't disappear for an hour without being questioned, and that made her sad just knowing how it would make her feel. She no longer had friends, nothing, just Naruto and Etsu. It was fun in the beginning, but the wells were drying up. At this time and day, what did you see yourself doing, Samui? What kind of life did you think you would be living a few years ago? The emperor asked, his tone betraying nothing, his expression neutral. A sad smile formed on Samui's face. I had imagined quitting my shinobi duties, living peacefully with the man I love, and kid in my arms. Something like that. But things have dulled. I'm forced to live in the shadows, away from the light. You have a wonderful daughter, Samui. Don't you love me? I do love you, Naruto, and my child is the best thing that has happened. I love her with all my heart, but I want more. You created an entire dimension with everything we'd want, the kind of world you only dream, but it lacks reality and other people. Naruto fell silent, considering a few thoughts that were popping in his mind. Why didn't you tell me it bothers you that you aren't able to interact with other people? He could have at least done something to change that, for her. I don't know, Samui said. You know, even now, another woman is taking care of my daughter while I sit here. I carried her for 9 months, with only Yugito and you knowing about it. Would you have liked it if the whole world knew? Samui shook her head. No, she said before adding. But I would have liked walking in the streets of this place, I would have enjoyed talking to someone else about it. I only had you and Yugito during the whole time, but now, felt like both we escaping her grasp. Naruto looked up at the ceiling. During night, it reflected the Milky Way, putting in a beautiful display of stars. I once thought of bringing my mother from the dead, just so she could see me and live her own life as well. Why didn't you do it? Naruto shook his head slightly. I don't know. Maybe I'm still thinking about it. I know it would please me having her around. He paused for a moment before continuing. I never wanted you to feel restricted. I just wanted both of you to be safe. We are safe, besides, as long as you still live, nothing can harm us. Naruto chuckled dryly. That is the thing, Samui, I'm afraid I might fail to do so. I may have all the power, but I just can't assure myself that I will protect you. Besides, I don't want her to see the world in its current state. You're very human, than most people say you are, Naruto. But you shouldn't be insecure. She believed this had something to do with his own father and the fact that he didn't want to make sacrifices. You've always believed in yourself, your power. What is special about this situation? I don't want to lose you, nor her, Naruto said quietly. He then released a long sigh. Would it make you happy if we change the premises around her and bring her to this place? Samui nodded. I see, Naruto said before taking a few more moments to think. We will have to set a few ground rules if we're going to change, and since I can't trust anyone with your safety, I will have to ensure that upcoming war will not last long. What will happen to Kumo? I won't make you fight them, Samui, and I will not destroy the village, the emperor said, standing up. He offered Samui his hand. Come on, let us go to inform Yugao first. I trust her enough to believe that she will become your friend. Samui took Naruto's hand before she responded, that is if she doesn't resent me, she said. Are you forgetting something? There's a woman in our bed, and I believe she is waiting patiently for you to return. May, Naruto said. Ah, this was going to be a long night for him. He snapped his fingers and a portal opened up. Go pack your things. We will now permanently live here. I will go talk to May about this. She is probably not going to be happy. Probably. Samui said, shaking her head. She is going to be downright angry and with all the right reasons. Good luck handling it. Naruto's quarters. The royal palace was truly a lonely place. Naruto didn't have too many people over the place or even living here. He'd pushed others to the Crystal Palace. It had enough rooms to accommodate all the important people within the capital as well some of the visitors he brought. It was possible for there to be just him alone in the royal palace. There have been a few moments where he sat in the throne room, all by himself with no one close by. Not even the royal guard lived in here, despite their job being to protect him. He didn't need the protection though. There was no one in this world who could kill him. The enemies didn't know that he couldn't be killed, not even allies knew that. Aside from the fact that he didn't need people weaker than him to protect him, he was also one with the palace. There was no one who could sneak into the palace without him noticing it. That didn't mean he knew everything that occurred in here. With Samui wishing to live a normal life with Etsu, he would have to push on some changes in the royal palace and put on some security for extra measures. The palace had at least 9 quarters, excluding his own. So there was enough to put people in without having much noise to fend off or having his peace being ruined by other people. The dimly lit passages brightened up as Naruto walked slowly, marching towards the quarters he rarely used. The double doors to his private place were closed, with Hisuke standing in front. You'd expect the man to have ordered a subordinate to stand guard, but given his loyalty, he preferred doing the work himself as he saw someone lower than him wasn't fit enough to protect her in his absence. Not that she needed much protection anyway. Heika, Hisuke said, giving a bow of his head to the emperor. Has everything been prepared? Hisuke nodded. Gurren is resting at her palace, and the cage, and his sister are within this palace. Nagato won't make it for tomorrow, he said. We have also intercepted a message from the Raikage calling a cage meeting in 7 days at the Land of Iron. Naruto nodded. Nagato can do as he likes, he said. Be in the throne room with Shinji, 7 a.m. sharp. I have something to show you too. He didn't wait for the man's response before opening the doors into his quarters. Hisuke did a hi before disappearing to tell Shinji that he had been summoned by the emperor. Mei wasn't in any of the rooms in the space. As Samui had said, she was in their bed. It wasn't like he often used the bed anyway. He didn't even have anyone to clean the place and cook for him in this place. He always ate in his core dimension along with Samui and Etsu. I was thinking that perhaps you were running away from me, Mei said. She was sitting on the large bed, back pressed against some pillows while a book was on her right hand. It seemed that she was reading while waiting for him. Why would I do something like that? Naruto asked, heading straight towards a large wardrobe, which stretched across the wall on the right side as he entered from the door. He took off his kimono, not minding Mei, leaving him with all the dark shinobi pants, and his bandaged feet. He then put on a red long-sleeved shirt. I don't know. I don't understand some of the things you do, Mei said with a small shrug of her shoulders. What took you so long? I was expecting you to return far earlier. I even cooked for you. Naruto didn't respond, not until he sat down on the edge of the bed. I had some thinking to do. Thinking? What were you thinking about? Mei asked, now closing her book. The beginning of Uchiha Naruto and where I would like to see myself ending, he said. His beginning. That was something that Mei had never been told. She doubted anyone else has been told about it. Everyone, except that other woman. Where was she anyway? Every time she came here, that woman was never present. Naruto always said she was in his castle, but he never took her there just so she could see it herself. She also knew that though Naruto spent much time in this throne room, this was one place he didn't use often. How did you begin, Naruto? I know the story of Uzumaki Naruto, but how did things change? I'm told you weren't always like this. When he was still going by Uzumaki Naruto and in the academy, he was said to have been an overly active person. I never told you, huh? Mei shook her head. You almost never tell me anything unless it is necessary. She frowned slightly at the thought, but didn't let it show in her voice. Naruto silently pulled the dark blue sheet down and got into bed, lying on Mei's left side, and rested his head on both his hands, while staring at the white ceiling. The story of Uchiha Naruto began in Konoha, 13 years ago on the 10th of October in an alley. I was backed against the wall, eyes closed, waiting for the glaring mob before me to deliver its righteous punishment. I waited and waited, but the attack never came. When my eyes opened, I found myself staring in the crimson eyes of Uchiha Madara. Of all the people in the world, he had saved me. I was happy, thankful. The months that followed, he brought me food, books, pulled the lid that had been put by the Sandame to keep me from the truth. After which, he took me in and made me Uchiha by blood. He taught me so many things, made me see the world for what it was and almost made me a perfect copy of himself. Years of extensive training followed. But he couldn't live forever. He died. After dying, the prologue was replaced by the first chapter. The first chapter of my life is Uchiha Naruto. No details. Mei frowned at this, but she didn't voice her thoughts. If you still had blonde hair, one would find it hard to believe that Madara was your grandfather, she said. Perhaps, Naruto said. The world is heading towards a bloody patch, and I'm going to do things that you will not like. How do you feel about it? Mei released a long sigh. I don't know, but I have to support you, she gave her honest response. What exactly are you going to do, Naruto? That is for another day, Naruto said. I have something else I wish to inform you. It is rather important. That made the Mizukage curious. She thought everything that Naruto told her was important, but it seemed whatever he was going to tell her carried some weight. What? You once questioned why I allowed Samui to be exiled from her homeland when I could have stopped the information about her connection with me from reaching A, Naruto started. Yes, and your answer was something about it being for the best. She also doesn't even make public appearances, and you rarely see her. I told you she lives in my dimension, but I have never allowed you there. I didn't lie to you. She does live in a world I created for her. Where are you taking this? The reason for everything I have told you is that by the time she was exiled from Kumo, she had just discovered that she was pregnant. I hid her because I didn't want the world to know. What? Mei's tone was flat. Care to repeat what you just said? Naruto didn't. She'd heard him clearly. Her name is Uzumaki Itsuko. You're the first person being told this. Mei was quiet for a good minute or more. You have a child with another woman, and you never bothered to tell me about this, not when we got married, not when we made love, not when you told me you would never lie to me. I'm your wife for fuck's sake. That isn't the kind of thing you keep from me. What am I to you, Naruto? She was shouting, now standing on her feet while glaring dangerously at Naruto. But the emperor didn't react to her anger, nor did he cast his eyes towards her. He continued with his stare down with the ceiling. Answer me, Naruto. How could you keep something like that from me? Obviously, she was angry, and close to attacking someone. If he wasn't Uchiha Naruto, she would have sure gone on with the violence with him. Naruto held out his right hand, stared at it for a few moments before getting out of bed. He faced the Godime Mizukage, and despite her anger, she could see that he was wearing a somewhat sad mask. Mei, you're someone I care for and someone I married, that was all he said before showing her his back. A portal opened in front of him before he spoke again. Come with me, I'd like for you to see her. And if I don't want to? Naruto didn't turn around to face her as he responded, that will be your choice and I will respect it. I have not forced you to do anything and I will not do that now, not ever. Nevertheless, it would really mean a lot to me if you come with. He paused for a moment before adding, it may have been unfair to keep it from you, but I did what I believed was best. But of course, you may not agree with it. What is done, nevertheless. I want us to move on from this and forge a tomorrow as a family. Family? Mei asked quietly. You already have your real family behind that door. This thing between us is just a sham, nothing more than an illusion to hide your real family. Naruto turned to look at Mei for a moment, his mask impassive, is that what you believe? He asked, but May didn't respond. I did keep you out. But now I'm inviting you in. It hasn't been fun for Samui either. She has been forced to live in the shadows, away from this world. She wants to live in the light. In this reality, she wants to begin a new chapter, and I'm inviting you to start this chapter with us. The following day it could not be argued that the air around the emperor was a little different from the usual. It felt more like a real emperor, that aura of superiority and excellence. His shakuho was also floating on his right side, while a piece of red clothing was added atop of his kimono. On his left side, Samui stood there, wearing a white kimono, and suspiciously, holding something in both her hands. Haisuke and Shinji were alarmed by this development, but just kept silent while kneeling before His Majesty. This is Uzumaki Itsuko, she is the only child. She will be living in the royal palace from now on, along with Samui. You're to make sure they are protected at all times. They didn't need to question anything, just follow the orders. Hi, Haisuke said. I will draft some of my most trusted men to take resident in the palace along with me. Once done, I will assign them into different positions. I will personally guard Samui and the princess. If there is such a thing, both of you have been promoted to nobles, by virtue, your families as well. While Haisuke will be in charge of protecting the royal family, the children and the wives precisely, Shinji, you will guard the palace itself as well as the emperor. Both of you will keep your other posts. Since both of you will be living here from now on, you will move your families here as well. Etsu will also need children to play with as she grows. The two simply nodded, excited, but they didn't show it. We'll be back in an hour so. During the time, rig the changes around palace, Naruto said before disappearing along with Samui. Well, I'm not surprised by this turn of events. I have always suspected something was up, Shinji said after the emperor had disappeared. He couldn't be surprised, not when this explained a lot of things. It explained why the emperor never actually took interest in leaving the palace, why Samui was mostly never present around the palace. Still, it went by some length for the emperor to have hidden this from everyone. He did understand that this was just going to cause troubles if it became public. I had my suspicions as well, Haisuke said with a nod. Royalty and nobility, huh? I have never been more honored. My wife is going to be a bother when I tell her about this. One more thing Shinji understood was why Haisuke was tasked with the children and wives. Between the two of them, the latter was much more lively while he was often serious, more like the emperor. What did he mean by wives? Who knows? Haisuke shrugged. So, when is Guren due? Shinji sighed. Who knows? She doesn't tell me anything. Probably left the capital to stay away from me, he said. Do you think the emperor knows? Yay, he does know about it. Why do you think he said you will move your families, when you have no one but a younger sister? After everything she has done, Guren deserves nobility. Out of everyone else, she has served the emperor most. The woman was also responsible for the building of this place. Naruto may have given her everything she needed for the project, but you couldn't take away her efforts. Even the emperor was willing to admit that she has played a vital role in the success of the empire. Well, His Majesty does keep her close, and she is probably his most valuable subordinate. He doesn't show much of it though, Shinji said. Do you think the Mizukage is aware of this? Yes, Haisuke said. His Majesty didn't look his usual self yesterday. He added, we better make preparations before His Majesty returns. We also have that meeting at noon. Yugao's house. There have been moments that Naruto shocked her to the core, and there have been moments when she expected some things from him. Though the emperor had a certain timeline in the way he operated, and his actions were often predictable, he had his moments. This one of the moments that the emperor has shocked, sucked the life and energy out of her system that she'd not said a word to him but taken a seat on her couch. She tried to regain the breath taken away and return her skin into a normal condition as the emperor stood still, seemingly bemused by her reaction to his unexpected presence. In this house, Yugao didn't buy much, and she didn't do any work. Naruto provided for her, and she wasn't about to say she didn't like the fact that the emperor provided for her even though she did nothing. She accepted his generous offer. When she moved into the capital, he'd offered for her to live a normal life, not working. A bit of a reprieve from all the work she has been doing through the years as an Anbu of the village. Still, in all the time she lived in this house, Naruto had never stepped inside before. This was a first. In the entrance of her living room, the emperor was standing still, with Samui beside him, carrying what appeared to be like a baby. The baby was wrapped up in a white clothing. She didn't even need to guess or be told what this actually meant, hence her shocked reaction. Both parents looked more like nobles, but the father figure didn't seem to click well with Naruto. Hello, Yugao, Naruto greeted. He'd just appeared in the spot he stood. No need to stand outside and knock when he could help himself. Yugao regained her bearings before clearing her throat. Naruto, she said, before looking at Samui, who was busy playing with the giggling child. The woman was smiling warmly, she seemed happy. Yugao's stomach twisted at the sight. That could have been her. Samui. The blonde looked up to her, leaving her fun time with the baby. She smiled at her, and that didn't make Yugao feel any better. Samui always did something like that when their paths crossed, she always smiled. She didn't want that smile. She hated it. Not because of anything, but because that woman has taken her place. She was just the woman Naruto used to sleep with, and now that woman was holding his blood. One didn't need to be a thinker to assume who would be favored. Naruto's left hand sneaked behind Samui, he gently ushered her towards the seats. Once both were sitting across Yugao, the black-haired emperor spoke, "This must be a surprise to you." "Not at all. I see we're still on the sarcastic streak," Naruto said. Yugao's eyes narrowed when Samui handed Naruto the baby. She watched curiously as to how the emperor would handle it. She wasn't surprised when a small smile graced his lips. Both his hands gently took the package and he brought the giggling child towards his chest. His Sharingan disappeared, replaced by his original cerulean eyes. "What do you want?" Her tone was a bit harsh, much more than she would have liked. This caused her to bite her lip. But Naruto didn't take it hard. He rarely took anything down those cold barriers. "I have a favor to ask," Naruto said, his eyes looking straight at her. He motioned for her to come. She did so with little hesitation. Naruto handed her the child, but she didn't want to, she was afraid she might do something. "Her name is Etsu. Uzumaki Etsuko. Uzumaki in honor of my mother." Yugao bit her lower lip once more. She struggled with her emotions, but Naruto's hands didn't tire. Finally, she took the wrapped child. No matter what she was feeling inside, she couldn't keep it while staring at the young one. Even the emperor didn't look at her with his favored Sharingan. Etsuko. Her skin was slightly pale, blue eyes, and she had blonde hair. By looks, she was her mother's daughter. She seemed to be around the age of 1. Feeling some energy leave her once more as she stared down at those innocent eyes, the melodious sounds the baby made. Reluctantly, Yugao put the child on her lap. Her right hand found its way toward the baby's soft hands. That seemed to excite her, as she made more sounds that only reminded her that she couldn't been a mother had things gone differently. "What do you want?" It wasn't Naruto who responded, but Samui. "I know this may not be easy for you, but Naruto says he trusts you. What I want is friendship. I don't particularly have anyone, and I'm finding this to be difficult without someone for moral support." Yugao chuckled mirthlessly. It could have been her making the request. It was not fair that she had to be forced into this situation. It was not fair for Naruto to put her into this position, and it was his fault that their relationship fell apart. He didn't try hard enough to make her come with to this country, he didn't try. Later Royal Palace. This was the first time that Temari was seeing a palace like this. Going to different places was restricted, or just Gaara didn't want to. But she'd only seen the throne room, the large indoor garden, passages, and another hall, which she assumed was for hosting guests, and the quarters they were given in this stay. The hall they were now in wasn't big as the throne room, but still big. Its floor was clothed with a crimson mat, while the walls were splashed with dark blue. On the right side, when standing from the entrance, the Uzumaki swirl was stamped in its crimson glory. The left had the Uchiha fan, and the wall opposite to the entrance had the Senju symbol. The ceiling was white and in its center, there was a map of the elemental nations, which was glowing a bit. The bluish light that filled the room came from all corners, which had light bulbs that radiated like diamonds. In the middle of the room, there was a rectangular table. It wasn't wooden or metal, but it was made of reddish crystal. A couple of chairs surrounded the table, and on the side, there was a throne-like chair, also made from reddish crystal. Temari didn't need to guess that the seat was for the emperor and the emperor only. She guessed the room was only created for meetings. Tamari went on to sit beside her brother. Before speaking, what do you think we're going to be told anyway? How things are going to move on with the war outside the country's walls, Gaara said before falling silent. He simply watched as the others started to fill in their seats. They had been the first ones to arrive after being led by what he presumed to be a member of the Royal Guard, which was a surprise because despite them being called the Royal Guard, you didn't find them crawling around the palace. But by the looks of things, it seemed like there were changes being made around the place. The four generals walked in along with the Godime Mizukage, Gurren and Conan. Gaara didn't need to guess to see that May didn't seem her usual happy self, but he didn't question about it, it wasn't his business. They exchanged a few pleasantries before the Emperor appeared himself. Unlike his indifferent self, he seemed and felt imposing as he walked in, eye closed and his shakuho floating on his right. A breathless silence followed suit as the Emperor took his seat. He didn't immediately open his visible eye, he waited for a few moments before he partially opened his left eye. A reddish glow radiated for a few moments before he spoke. Kotaro. His voice was of a man in power, authoritative, and commanding. This did nothing but set the tone of the meeting. Gurren had to narrow her eyes a bit at the Emperor at hearing his tone. What changed, she thought. He was acting more like the way he was when she first met him, or when he came up to her. During the time and after, he didn't ask for her opinion, and she knew even if she put her thoughts out there, they wouldn't matter because he wasn't looking for them. He was more commanding, less friendlier, and just dished out orders. You just had to follow them, no questions asked. Over the past, he became somewhat friendly, and actually listened to someone. Though, that didn't mean he was going to follow through with what you told to him. She had seen Sasuke completely disregard his orders, and he didn't appear to mind. Haisuke and Shinji didn't question his orders. Yes, they voiced their opinions every now and then, but they never stepped out of the line. Now did so. Worse was Kotaro, who seemed to have so much in his mind. Kotaro cleared his throat before speaking. We estimate that around 10,000 strong men from Iwagakure will abandon the village in the days to follow. These shinobi are likely to attack Sunagakure as soon as they settle down. They will also come to us, and are also to join in other forces from other villages. Our allies, rivers, vegetables, grass, tea and hills are likely to face organized hits as well. Kurigakure is unlikely to be attacked by this force as it doesn't have the naval capabilities to invade it. Kumogakure is another matter altogether. They have the resources to go anywhere they want. It remains to be seen if the Raikage will prioritize his attacks on our allies. Given Kumo's numbers, we can expect heavy assaults from all corners, but I assume that they will not want to fight His Majesty. They are likely to retreat should His Majesty confront any of the platoon. Yesterday, we tactically removed the threat of our border neighbors in the Fang country. A few of our forces occupy the country now. Strategically, occupying the Fang country gives us more ground to cover. With our forces in the Fang country, we can halt any movement through it. This means that enemies will have to go through the borders of the Fire country. Kumo only has one route through land, and that is through bears, Shinji added after Kotaro. Gaara sighed. This was going to be troublesome, but he was more than ready to deal with any threats that may arise from the war. They tried everything with the Mizukage to avoid the war from happening. How many meetings did he hold with Konoha, Kumo, and Iwa? The Raikage had been stubborn in all meetings while Onoki continually refuted their attempts for a non-aggression treaty. In fact, the Dead Cage had made a ridiculous condition to get him to even think about the matter. He had requested the Emperor's head. What of Konoha? He asked. Konoha is likely to stay neutral in the beginning of things. But I suspect they will send their heavy hitters as the war reaches its peak, Haisuke said. Gurren snorted in response. They can claim to have no part in the war while other nations lose their shinobi. After the war, they are going to be fresh from battles, military force not suffering from anything. Konoha has been knocked out as the strongest, but its shinobi are still some of the finest. Are you suggesting they may try to claim their position after the war, knowing that other nations are exhausted? Tamari questioned. I'm not suggesting, I'm saying that is what will happen, Gurren said. We must guard against something like that. Konoha's participation in the war can be forced, Conan said. Iwa and Kumogakure aren't the only enemies. If they are attacked by another nation posing as us, they will be forced to fight. It may not be against us or with us, but they will be forced to fight. They has collected a fair number of enemies because of their activities in the past wars. Other nations would be looking to settle old scores. As it stood, there would be battles all over the land, in the fire country, wind, and lightning country. She doubted Naruto would permit battles to occur in this land. He did create huge walls to avoid such things happening. I have already assured both Mei and Gaara that I will not allow their villages to fall. Naruto spoke, keeping his tone low. Rice doesn't have the numbers to overwhelm the amount of enemies, but we do have the quality. Nevertheless, I will indulge this war and play my part in most battlefields. Heike, you must, now wanted to say something, but a look from the emperor told him to shut it. I called you here because I want you to discuss how you will fight. And I wish to inform you something I have been doing over the past 2 years, Naruto said before pausing for a second. In all the elemental nations, I have planted special trees that will be consuming chakra, from shinobi. It will cap the amount of chakra one possesses, and the number of chakra users within a village. These trees are sentimental and their possesses to manage chakra around the nations. After the war, one who abuses it, will lose their chakra and will be reduced to just civilians. One more thing, after the war, I will become the emperor of the elemental nations, that is if the idea is still appealing to me. Haisuke, you will inform them of the other news, Naruto said before disappearing into thin air. Mizukage Dono, did you hear that? Gaara spoke before Haisuke could. Mei didn't look at Gaara. Mizukage. He called again. Did you hear what I just said? Mei merely nodded, causing Gaara to shake his head. What His Majesty meant is that he will become emperor if that is what is needed to stabilize the nations after the war, Haisuke said. The other matter he wants me to inform you is that there is a first princess, Etsu, born to Samui. The revelation was greeted with silence. I'm sorry, what? Tamari was more shocked than anyone. It was hard to believe. That man couldn't possibly be a father. What sort of a father would he be, if he was always like that? His Majesty is a father, I believe that is the implication of his words, Kotaro said, not smiling the least. When were you informed of this? This morning, actually, Shinji said. Surprisingly, Gaara spoke something that would have normally come out from the mouth of Mei. Well, I believe this is something to celebrate. Now nodded, I agree with the cage, but we must first finish the business at hand, he said. Is it just me, or is His Majesty going to end up eradicating shinobi? Konoha Naruto's kimono spread its wings out as he slowly descended down the center of Konoha in broad daylight. He'd not taken the time to see Samui before coming to this village after leaving the people in the royal palace. He'd just flown into space. The emperor finally landed. There was no sound that was made by his landing, not even a little. Unlike last time when he appeared in the village by literally crashing down the village, he had taken a gentle step this time. It didn't take more than a minute for his presence to be noticed by the villagers of Konoha, and the scent of panic reached his nose as he looked up, staring into the blue heavens. No one wanted to come close to the emperor. The last time he'd appeared in the old village, things didn't end well. While some people were opening cursing him, Naruto just continued to breathe in the air around the atmosphere. This was the village that he had created. Its foundation had been laid up by his power, no one else's. He had hated these people, those who made him suffer. Still, now as he stood at this village, feeling a range of emotions from these people, he couldn't enjoy tormenting them as they did to him. But that didn't mean he had started to like them. Not a chance in hell, or in heaven. Naruto grabbed his shakuho as Anbu started to surround him. Guess I better remove the remaining barriers I put up, he thought, slamming the stuff on the ground. The eyes revealed nothing being undone, it seemed like just a motion of no purpose. This is a surprise, Sasuke said, stepping into the view. With your recent activities in Iwagakure, I imagined that you'd be home planning defensive strategies, the Uchiha added, having just being told that Naruto had stepped into the center of Iwagakure for battle. It wasn't anything that they didn't expect after Iwa's attack on Naruto's people. Sasuke was just surprised that the man had not put the village into shambles for what it did. Naruto didn't respond to Sasuke, nor did he even act like he had noticed the Uchiha's presence. He just continued staring up at the heavens. How long has it been since he destroyed that Konoha? He certainly didn't feel anger at being in here, nor when he could faintly hear the curses being directed at him by some of the villagers. He just felt indifferent. As suspected, the events that have touched his life over the past 2 years have changed some things about his feelings. Sasuke frowned when Naruto didn't respond to him. He was certainly acting like he hadn't heard him. Emperor, he called. Naruto's response came. His eyes fell on the Uchiha as well. It is advisable that you stay away from the streets. We don't want anything that may incite violence, Sasuke said, walking over to the emperor who had once again taken his eyes away from him. He tried touching the emperor on the shoulder to take him away from this place, but something stopped him. Naruto looked at Sasuke. It was then that the other Uchiha noted that there was something different with the emperor. He seemed off, if not unusual, a lack of a better word thereof. Acknowledged, Naruto merely said before disappearing. Naruto next appeared atop of the Hokage Tower. The place looked really different from how he had formed it. Well, it has been some years since this new village was created, he should have expected it to change, regardless of everything that has happened to it. The mood around the village has also changed, unlike when they first moved here. It seems that the cold hearts have warmed up to this new land that have been forced to call home. The houses he'd built were numerous, but the new ones were also at large. A minute or so passed before the Rokudaime Hokage appeared beside the emperor, along with Sasuke, Jiraiya and a squad of Anbu. You've certainly grown this village into a pleasant shape, Hokage-sama, Naruto said in a neutral tone. His polite manner of speaking caught the others by surprise as they'd expected him to simply call his former sensei just as Kakashi. Well, it wasn't in a bad shape when you left it, Kakashi said. The morale was though. But after a few months we managed to get things going. The emperor nodded. With experienced shinobi by your side, I wouldn't have expected you to fail in your job despite other glaring failures you have accumulated over the years, he said. Things change, people change, I was forced to change, Kakashi said with a shrug, his eyes not looking at the emperor, but down at the village streets where the emperor was looking as well. So it appears, Naruto said, casting his glance at Kakashi for a moment. Obito is finding the presence unpleasant, I see, he added. The Uchiha wasn't here, but he was in the village, that he knew. He just couldn't find the former Akatsuki anywhere. His sensing skills have dulled, it seemed. Kakashi wisely chose not to comment on that matter since Naruto hadn't asked a question. If I may be bold, what brings you here, Emperor? Sightseeing, Naruto said. A war is coming as well. But I imagine Sasuke and Obito's Susanoo will be on guard to protect this village. I've also come here to remove the last of the barriers I'd placed as well as return a certain dog I should have executed. He snapped his left fingers and a portal opened, before flushing out a gagged Kiba. Kakashi quickly ordered the Anbu present to take the Inuzuka away from the place before he could start doing anything stupid that may force Naruto's hand. Sasuke, walk me out, will you? I would rather not have to shield myself from stones being thrown at me. Sasuke nodded, but Jiraiya beat him to the words, I will accompany you as well, he said, speaking for the first time since Naruto appeared. I hope that isn't a problem, Emperor. I have no complaints, Naruto said. I will see you soon, Kakashi. The Emperor said before jumping away. Jiraiya and Sasuke followed after him. Oh god no, Kakashi's shoulders slumped when Naruto's words registered inside his head. This wasn't happening to him. He didn't want to see this. Naruto's words only meant he was going to gate crash the cage meeting. He had felt it in his gut that the man would do as such, but now it had just confirmed it that once again, his gut was right. Naruto silently walked through the streets, hands folded across his chest, with Jiraiya and Sasuke in each of his side. The latter didn't have much to say to the Emperor, he had spoken to Naruto enough. He was just curious how the blonde was going to act in the upcoming war. Was he going to do it in the same way as he did in Iowa, or was he just going to allow it to roll as a normal war? Something on your mind, Sasuke? I'm curious, Naruto spoke once again, cutting off the Uchiha. On another note, curiosity is a good thing. You want to know something about the war, my actions to be precise. I cannot, no, I don't want to answer the question. I want you to be surprised. What fun will there be if you know how things are going to play out? Sasuke merely grunted in response as they once again fell silent. Jiraiya looked at Naruto, how long has it been? The blonde seemed like a man now. He looked older than Sasuke despite them being of the same age. He hadn't expected Naruto to suddenly appear in the village, not when they were facing the abyss of war. He had troubles accepting that Naruto had just come here to sightsee. What was there to see? How Konoha has been progressing after he destroyed their old village and banished them into a new land. His mixed emotions towards the emperor had surfaced the moment he felt him, and he had thought he had gotten over it, but he was wrong. So many things still troubled him. At least he could be happy that Naruto has a life, ruling a successful nation while not mindlessly occupying other lands for the sake of being tyrant. For certain he knew that both Kushina and Minato would be very proud of their son. He has done well for his country. No matter what he wanted to say to Naruto, Jiraiya couldn't bring himself to say it. He couldn't. They reached the gates, and Naruto was about to leave, and he couldn't say he was sorry, for the 100th time. Naruto looked at the figure leaning against the gate frames. Shikamaru. Ah, the Nara a part of me considered a friend. That was an admission that Shikamaru didn't find to be surprising. Since the academy, they always had an understanding between them. Had things been different, they could have become best friends. I'm honored to hear you say that, Your Majesty. To be honest, a part of me considered you a friend as well. That is pleasing, Naruto said. Shikamaru walked over, handed the emperor a container. It didn't take a minute for word to spread out around the village that you were here. I bumped into Teuchi and he gave me this. He said it was on the house. No doubt ramen, and the fact that it felt hot, meant it had just been cooked. Tell him the emperor appreciates it, Naruto said, flicking his shakuho for a moment before he folded his feet, while floating above ground. The truth-seeking balls materialized from the shakuho and took a position beneath him. I guess I better eat this while it's still hot, he said. Before he flew away, he spoke once more. Jiraiya, what did I tell you the day you first appeared before me? If you can't accept those words, then you should die as miserable as you are. After Naruto disappeared, Shikamaru looked at the deflated Sannin. He walked over to the man and placed his right hand on his left shoulder. Whatever he said to you, accept it. He meant it. Later that day, Naruto's quarters. I thought you'd be gone. After everything, Naruto said, walking over to the living room where Mei was sitting, alone. Isn't it that you must look after Kurigakure as well? Are you that tired of my presence that you'd want to see me gone already? Not at all, Naruto said as he sat down. I'd had thought you would have returned home by now. Gaara has already taken a leave as well. I figured you follow his lead. Besides, there is a cage summit coming in the next days. This is my home as well, Mei said, a bit strongly. How can look after things in my absence, and it isn't like I have to defend the village against an invasion. Naruto merely nodded as Samui came up and said something prompting the emperor to follow her. He didn't take long to return to the living room, but now wearing a crimson long-sleeved shirt. Picking up where Mei had left off, he continued. That is about right. How do you do it anyway? I mean, turn impassive this minute and be a likable person in the next. This morning, during the meeting and now. Naruto appeared to think for a few moments before he responded. Time, place and the rest you configure, he ended up saying with a shrug. You took note. And I was thinking you were a bit absorbed in your thoughts to take notice of anything. Mei said nothing in response because she'd settled to just looking at the blonde-haired woman who was making herself comfortable beside Naruto. She frowned at what her eyes were showing her, but said nothing to comment on it. This was the sort of thing that she had to contend with. She has always known that Naruto was involved with Samui, he'd told her himself some time ago. But she felt comfortable when she didn't see that woman in his space, but now she was sharing the same air with her. What she felt inside made her feel some unhealthy emotions. How did it go at Konoha? Samui asked. Nothing unexpected happened. I didn't get to talk to Obito though, Naruto responded. Did they finish their jobs? Samui shook her head. No, it should take a few days for everything to be completed. I doubt that getting Gurren to leave her palace will be an easy thing. I didn't consider that she feels it belongs to her when the choice was made, perhaps I should reconsider. Once again, Samui shook her head. It is safe that she stays here until she is able to resume her duties as Prime Minister. Besides, I've gone through what she was going through, I can offer her emotional support. You offer someone emotional support? Naruto looked bemused by the idea. Motherhood does work wonders, huh? Ahem. May cleared her throat. If you have forgotten, I'm still here, and there are important issues that need to be discussed.